Welcome to the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for Friday, November 12th. I'm Andrew Walworth. Today, we congratulate our own Carl Cannon for winning the long-running bet with our fearless leader, Tom Bevan, over whether the president's infrastructure bill would pass. It did, with help from 13 House Republicans, and Carl will soon be enjoying 2 bottles of fine wine. You're all invited to raise a glass with him on Monday when President Biden has promised to sign the legislation into law. Some think this is the reboot the administration needs. The poll numbers are, however, quite terrible for the president right now. So what will it take to turn things around? Also, the climate summit in Glasgow is scheduled to close today. China and the U.S. signed an agreement on coal, but progressives are already complaining that not enough was accomplished. And the investigation into the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol has run into an entirely predictable roadblock, which is that the former president is invoking executive privilege. The courts are now involved, and things are slowing down. Joining me to discuss all this are Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics, and the victorious Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief for RCP. So, Tom, let's dive right in. This infrastructure bill passed. The Build Back Better bill is moving ahead, albeit in fits and starts. So have the Democrats turned the page here, and is it smooth sailing from here on?
Well, first, I would like to congratulate Carl Cannon. I'm always gracious in defeat. But I am not sure that this is going to be the cure-all the Democrats have been looking for. In fact, there have been 3 polls that have been taken since infrastructure passed on Friday of Biden's approval rating. In 2 of them, he's actually gone down. So they're going to have to demonstrate in concrete ways how this is going to help the average American. I mean, the big deal right now is inflation. We got terrible inflation numbers, the highest in 30 years, over 6% annualized rate, and everything's more expensive these days, and people are feeling that. And so the administration wants to say this will eventually help ease inflation. These are historic investments. Pete Buttigieg was at the White House press briefing earlier this week and said, look, this is not a immediate fix for things. This is a more of a historic investment. That's all well and good for the administration to make that case. However, it is not going to help them in the short term and medium term in terms of dealing with these inflationary pressures that are hitting every American all across this country.
Well, Carl, Al Hunt had a column this week, and it's on RCP's front page. This is what he said. Here's the probable 2022 environment: enactment of the most sweeping domestic legislation since the Great Society, a booming economy, and a normalized pandemic. This would put them, the Democrats, in better shape next November than it looks like last week, unless they screw it up. That's his view of things. So again, congratulations on your bet, but how do you feel? Do you think Al Hunt's right that 2022 things will look a lot better for the Democrats than they do right now?
Look, Al Hunt said, he says, okay, things should be good for Democrats if they don't screw it up. And he had pointed words for the woke progressives in the squad or the progressive caucus, whatever they call it. People are not with you on open borders and defunding the police. Stop talking about it. Pretty sharp column. I liked it. He invoked Reagan era quip. I don't think it was Reagan himself, but hey, the deficit is big enough to take care of itself. Moderates shouldn't focus just on the deficit spending so much and simmer down about that. He's asking for Democrats to behave in a more strategic way in terms of their reelection. But these are not, ephemeral issues. These progressives, they ran against, in the case of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she ran against an entrenched Democrat to win office, and she did so because she really believes in progressivism as it's defined in the today. And this is not her this is not her tactics. This is her beliefs. And the moderates are pointing, they're really worried about inflation, and they think runaway government spending is one of the factors in it. Look, Tom said 6% inflation. It may be worse than that because the October numbers are what freaked everybody out. It was almost a full percent in October alone. Gasoline prices have gone up 50% since Joe Biden took office. And the things that are going up, their housing prices are increasing, energy costs, food. These are necessities. These aren't luxuries. And the Democrats, they showed they can govern by passing an infrastructure bill. Look, that's the minimum of what Congress ought to do. And I don't give the Republicans any pass for not voting for it. I think that's absurd. But that's Congress doing its job. Look, I'm happy to win our little bet, and Tom and I will drink that wine together. So there were never any great stakes involved. But Andy,
You're just hoping that means he'll buy drinkable wine.
well, he always does, to be honest.
It's like a Christmas gift you get for someone else, but it's really for you.
I remember once I got my father when I was a little kid a baseball for Christmas.
Exactly. Hint,
He
hint.
said, he said, well, who am I supposed to play catch with? That's when Tom and I bet balls of wine. There's an element to that. But Andy, I wanted to go back to this infrastructure. That's these guys showing up, punching the clock. That's what they ought to do. This other bill, I'm not sure it's going to pass. They've called it human infrastructure. It's social spending. The individual elements of it poll well. That's what Al Hunt's alluding to there. If they pass that, is that going to be a considered achievement? If all the gains are wiped for working people are wiped out by inflation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics came out with this jobs report, and it was stunningly good news. 235,000 jobs added in August and September that hadn't been counted. And the administration thought, okay, they were flying high, and they're now back on the road, and this off-year election is going to be a blip. And then this inflation thing. And this was the issue that really undid Jimmy Carter and got Americans beginning to question his basic competence, was runaway inflation and the high interest rates that came with it. So I think that's what the Democrats fear the most.
So 2 things to add. Number 1, I would like to point out, while I was gracious in defeat, Carl has not been gracious in going double or nothing with me on this social spending bill, whether it's going to pass Congress.
Well, wait. I've been gracious in
Human
victory.
infrastructure, Carl.
I haven't been foolhardy in victory.
I just want to make that clear to all of our listeners that Carl is taking his wine and going home. But like gas price is a perfect example, right? So the administration, their response to the issue of gas prices, well, there's not a lot we can do. And the deputy press secretary who was filling in for Jen Psaki this week said repeatedly from the podium, and Biden has said it also, we're studying this very carefully. We're watching this very carefully. But, Biden said in a town hall last month, well, it's really up to the Saudis, whether they're going to pump more oil. We've begged OPEC plus, whatever they call it now, to pump more oil, and they declined.
Hey, Tom, can I interject something there? I've noticed that. Isn't that a bad look to beg the Saudis to pump more oil while in Scotland, John Kerry is vowing to get rid of oil?
We're going to get to that. That's okay. Yes. We'll get to the climate thing. But at the same time, right? And this is the contradiction. Biden has shut down the Keystone Pipeline. We learned last week that they're actually reviewing this Michigan pipeline that they're going to possibly shut that down. And so the administration is pursuing policies that are actively causing gas prices to go up, and basically has taken the incentive or the ability out of our hands, put it in someone else's. And I just don't think that's something that the American people are going to appreciate, and they're going to hold this administration responsible for it. So that really has not much to do with infrastructure. I mean, Pete Buttigieg is going to, take some of this money and put in charging stations around the country. I mean, that's fine, 3 years, five years from now. It does not help them in the short term how they can get a hold of gas prices. The only thing that they're, considering, and they haven't even done it yet, is releasing oil from the strategic petroleum reserves, which they have not done yet. But I suspect they're going to have to do it in the near term, because they have to demonstrate that they are in touch with voters and their concerns about these rising prices, and gas prices in particular is one that is exceedingly important to people. And it's also can be considered regressive in the sense that people have to drive. I mean, it's something that affects people every single day.
Oh, that's true. And it's not just driving. The cost of heating oil, and especially propane, is way up. I think propane is up about 90% over last year. And in places like New Hampshire, which I want to talk about in a minute, but really throughout rural America, people are dependent on propane for home heating. And I wonder what the political impact of that is going to be.
And the administration has already sort of acknowledged that, hey, I think Jennifer Granholm did, Energy Secretary earlier this week, was like, hey, listen, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad, folks. Home heating oil prices are they're up, and they're going to continue to go up in the short term. It's going to be very expensive this winter for a lot of folks.
Yeah. I did want to bring up one thing, which just because it came out this morning, which was that Senator Murkowski in Alaska announced that she was going to run for re-election in 2022. No real surprise there, but she will be facing a Trump-backed challenger. Trump has already endorsed, I guess it's Alaska Commissioner of Administration, Kelly Tshibaka. Murkowski is one of the 7 Republican senators who voted to convict Trump, but she's the only one of those 7, it's interesting, that is actually up for re-election in 2022. You both know her and followed her. Is this going to be a big test, and is she vulnerable, do you think?
I do think she's vulnerable. She is obviously well known there. She starts with a huge advantage in terms of name recognition, money, all that stuff. So for any person to challenge an incumbent, it always starts off with an uphill battle. I don't know. I haven't seen her approval ratings in the state recently. She's generally been well liked, even though she has been really struck the sort of independent record, and she has been seen as sort of anti-Trump, and she's going to have a fight on her hands. There's no question. You just look around the country and you see where the grassroots of the Republican Party is, and I think she should absolutely not take anything for granted. She's going to be in a real fight.
I have a different perspective, Andy.
Shocking, Carl.
Well, I think that she could run as an independent and win in that state. And the Republican, I think she could run as a Democrat and win in that state. And Schumer would be happy to have her. The Trumpsters could overplay their hand here. She's done this before. She was beaten a primary, I think it was 2010, by a Tea Party candidate.
Right, that's correct.
Now, he didn't have anything like Donald Trump supporting him, but he had this Tea Party movement. And I think she ran a write-in candidate in November and won.
Which was shocking. I mean, those write-in campaigns are very tough to pull off.
Strom Thurmond did it. I don't know any other senator who did it. I'm thinking back. But anyway, what I'm saying is that she's very popular. Her father, Frank, was popular. I think she's probably more popular in Alaska than Trump. Now, that would count Democratic voters in my calculation. But she's a shoo-in for any general election. And the Republican Party there is really trying to make sure she gets to the general election with the R on her name. They've fiddled with the nomination mechanisms. I think it's going to be a ranked choice voting thing now. If she loses, she could win because she'd be second on most of the ballots, and supposedly the Trump candidate would be fourth. That's the idea anyway. What you could have happen is what happened in Virginia. It could help show the Republicans a way through without Trump. If Trump throws all of his chips in this and loses, it might help break the mystique of Trump.
Mm-hmm. Right. I was just going to say that I think that in New Hampshire, where Chris Sununu has decided not to run, I thought that was very interesting as well. He was really the number one pick, I think, in the country.
He's another scion, a political scion. His father was governor, yeah.
Right. And now he's decided, instead of running for the Senate, to run for a 4th term as governor. And Scott Brown and Kelly Ayotte, who would be 2 of the more high-profile Republican candidates who might run, have both said they are not going to run. So it's just another political tea leaf this week that, at least in my opinion, makes me think that the Republicans may have a harder time winning the Senate than some people think right now, especially when you add it to the kind of primary fights that we're likely to see in places like Alaska.
I think the Sununu news was huge. I mean, he was the top choice for Republicans to run in that seat, and I think he would have been the favorite to win. But back to Murkowski, her approval rating is 41%. She's got 41% disapproval, 18% undecided, and the Alaska GOP has endorsed her opponent. So again, just gives you a sense of where the lay of the land is there. I think she's going to be in a real battle. I think generally speaking, as this plays out, we talked a little bit about the Democratic Party and the internal conflicts that they have to work out, of whether they, take their foot off the gas as far as social justice is concerned. At least initially, my gut reaction would be the landscape, unless it changes for the Democrats, is going to be so bad that Republicans are going to be able to win some of these races with Trumpier candidates than they otherwise would have.
Yeah. Well, let's just talk about Glasgow.
I'm told it's the Emerald Isles. Is that?
No, that's it's Scotland.
That was an Obama joke, Carl.
Yeah, right.
You missed that? Obama said, "While we're here on the in the Emerald Isles, let me quote the Bard."
Did he really?
Yeah, Shakespeare, an Englishman. He double muffed it.
So he was in Scotland, said he was in Ireland, and quoted an Englishman. Well, as my friend Michael Kelly once said about a column he wrote, I had the virtue of being wrong in all respects.
Well, it's this summit, this COP26 summit, I guess it's called, is scheduled to wrap up today. It may go into extra innings, they're saying, but the big news is there was this agreement between China and the U.S. Saying that they would cooperate on limiting emissions, particularly when it comes to coal. And so John Kerry, who is our special climate envoy, said it's the first time China and the United States have stood up, the two biggest emitters in the world, and said, quote, we're going to work together to accelerate reductions. And then he went on to say, quote, yesterday, because I think this must have happened on Thursday, was bigger than some people think, implying that this is probably less than the progressives wanted to see. Carl, the president made a pretty big deal of this summit going into it, but it seems a little bit like a bust. I mean, there doesn't seem to be much enthusiasm for it.
Well, China, which is responsible for 30% of the coal output, coal emissions in the world, um, agreed in principle that they would look at this, but there's no timetable, there's no specifics.
And China always keeps to their agreements.
Well, that's the other part. What the climate change activists are going to want is another summit to get acknowledgement, I guess, is something. If this is your big issue, but the activists who've been clamoring outside, making noise, they want more than talk. They want specific quotas met, and they want the powers to say how they're going to do it. What is going to happen now, I think, because of what John Kerry himself said, and is that the United States is going to go back to financing some of these efforts, because Donald Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, and one of the things that would save the United States money, because these countries, emerging economies, particularly India, which are big polluters, the idea was that the wealthy nations should subsidize their getting off of coal and fossil fuels. And now it looks like the American taxpayers are going to be doing some of that again. That seems concrete.
So, Tom, is this a political winner, though, for the White House?
Yes and no. I mean, it is when you look at the data. I mean, the environment, climate change is one of the top priorities of Democratic voters. I mean, it just is. And so in that sense, it helps Biden with the progressive wing of his party. They want to see him engaged on this. They want to see him leading on this. They want to see him re-engaging with the world, all of this stuff. So in that sense, it is. More broadly speaking, the environment and climate change is pretty low. It's very low on the list of Republicans, and independents are, it's down the list behind the economy, education, healthcare, those sorts of things. And so I don't think it's a big winner. It's going to move the needle for the administration here at home. And certainly to the extent that Republicans can make the case that the Biden administration is pursuing policies, whether they're climate-based or not, that are causing gas prices to go up, causing inflation, causing lower growth at home, whatever the case may be, making us less energy independent, that could really backfire on them, actually, politically, in the midterms and in 2024. So it's a winner in the sense that it's the erogenous zone of the Democratic Party, one of the erogenous zones of the Democratic Party.
Thank you for that visual. Yeah.
But in terms of it actually producing real sort of political movement here at home, I'm not sure it's going to do that.
Larry Kudlow really draws a connection between the sort of environmental stuff and the inflation. Here's what he says. This was in a column he wrote this week. He said, a big chunk of this inflation story is energy. World oil prices up to $83 from $53, which is where they were when Biden was inaugurated. Gasoline up 60% to $3.42 from $2.15. You know what, Mr. President? There's a solution to this particular problem. It's called drill, 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 produce, produce, produce. For a lot of Americans, those pocketbook issues are going to be more important, I think, than an agreement with China over something that's going to happen in 2035 or 2055 or all the way down the line, don't you think?
Well, I don't disagree with you, Andy. There's two big picture things going on here, though. The first is that Americans of any persuasion, whether they're ardent Sierra Clubbers or, work for an oil company are not too happy about the idea that the United States will make sacrifices that affect our economy, that lead to inflation and other disruptions, cost jobs, when India and China are not. That's just not going to be a winning political issue, and it doesn't even make sense. So everybody has to do this, and Americans want to see that again, regardless of their views of climate change. In terms of the short-term inflation and short-term job loss, though, this idea that to have a clean planet, jobs have to be dirty, that we're willing to pollute and do other things that we know are wrong, so people don't lose their jobs in the oil patch. I think that argument has kind of run its course. I don't think that the Republicans are going to get as much traction from that as they have in the past. And I think especially among young voters, there's a perception, Andy, that it took 400 years, well, from the dawn of the Industrial Revolution till now, to completely befoul this planet, and cleaning it up is going to take a lot of jobs, and they may be in different sectors, but there are jobs in solar farms, there are jobs in solar panels, there are jobs in environmental cleanup, there are jobs in these areas. So I think on a macro level, that argument's starting to sound stale to voters.
Yeah, I generally agree with that, but I think most people you ask them, are you in favor of clean air and clean water? Of course they are. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? Even Republicans, independents, of course. But I think they also believe that we have to have a balanced, rational energy policy. We can't just be putting up windmills and solar panels and assume that that's going to do the trick, which is what Democrats want us to do. I mean, John Kerry said at this thing, there will be no coal in the United States by 2030. That's what he said at COP26. That's not balanced. That seems like fantasy land, okay? That is 8 years away, and you're telling me there's not going to be any more coal in the United States, none produced, none burned. And to Carl's point, meanwhile, what's China going to be doing? I mean, it's so people look at that and think that's ridiculous. We should have this was the Republicans' mantra for a long time, which I think from a messaging perspective was really smart. All of the above. We want all of the above.
Tom, that was a Democratic view too. Democrats wouldn't
Right.
argue with that for
So
years.
we want we want wind, we want solar, we want nuclear, by the way. Nuclear is
and we wanted energy independence. Remember when that was a bipartisan?
Exactly. And so unless the administration produces something like that, if they continue down this path where, Biden there was a headline right when he went to COP26 and he gave his speech that he introduced some new rule that was targeting the oil and gas industry, and at the same time he was sort of begging them to help him produce more energy. And it's just like that kind of incoherence from policy wise from the administration is going to get them in a lot of trouble. It is not. They need to have a much more coherent, cohesive, and succinct policy than just saying, no coal by 2030. That's not going to get it done.
Andy, can I add one thing to that? Because I talked over Tom. He mentioned nuclear. If the Democratic Party, official/unofficial position, but it's liberal interest groups that it caters to, are against all fossil fuels, gasoline, natural gas, coal, and they won't embrace nuclear energy. I mean, you're going to have next year, Ford's going to have its new F-150 plug-in truck. It looks like the greatest vehicle invented in this country since Henry Ford did the Model A. But there are places in this country, where there's no nuclear power and there's no natural gas, so there's none of these other things. You're going to be driving that Ford F-150 and plugging it in a plugging station that's hooking to an electrical power plant that's burning coal to give you electricity. How is that helping the environment?
Not to mention the rare earth minerals that have to be mined to make the battery that goes in that truck, which is another issue.
No, they don't want that either. They don't want mining either, Tom.
And not to mention we're almost completely dependent on China for that. So there are it's a complicated thing. And I just think the administration has to be a little more practical and not so much pie in the sky in terms of, but again, that's what their base wants. Their base wants them to say there's no coal. They want them to say there will be no internal combustion engines. We will be all electric by, whatever the number is.
Well, I suggest if you're going to be all electric, you're going to need nuclear power plants.
Well, let's talk about, we just a few minutes left here, but I want to talk about this January 6th investigation, which on Thursday, Federal Appeals Court agreed to temporarily halt delivery of presidential records to the House committee. This is generally regarded as a win for Trump. It slows things down. The appeal court will hold oral arguments before November 30th, I think. The case could eventually go to the Supreme Court. Tom, this has infuriated some progressives, but at the same time, isn't this pretty much business as usual? I mean, isn't this what presidents do when they're being investigated by Congress? Has there ever been a president who didn't invoke privilege at this point in an investigation?
No. Has there been a president who's invoked privilege when he's no longer in office? I think is the question that's being.
Has there been a president who was no longer in office who thought he was still president?
Right. Right. So we'll see. I mean, I think these.
Remember, he's got an envoy going to Kosovo, the non-president.
Look, I think this appeals court is all Democrats, Democrat appointees. And so I think this stuff is going to, and maybe it will go to the Supreme Court and we'll see. But I think Trump is not going to win the next decision on the appeals court is my take on it. And I suspect these documents will be produced or by the archivist for the January 6th investigation. I don't know what they're going to show or whether it's going to change any minds. The January 6th investigation is already in much the same territory as the impeachments. I mean, 90% of
it's
people
the third. It's the third impeachment.
Yeah, I mean, 90% of people, 95%, maybe 99% of people have their minds made up. Number one, if they're paying attention to it, they already have their minds made up about whether it's a complete show trial or whether it's a legitimate inquiry to save our democracy. And that might be, I don't know, 5% of the population that's actually paying attention. The other 95% don't know anything about it or have vaguely heard about it and don't know the inner workings. And
well, Tom, maybe you should watch a little bit more MSNBC because I have been watching MSNBC lately, which I do. I watch them all. I figure it's part of my job. And it is wall to wall January 6th investigation coverage. So someone's paying attention to it.
Well, right.
Trump leaving office was bad for ratings for them. So, but now they
as he will tell you himself.
Yeah, well, that's right. So, but now they can get their audience ginned up again on Trump. It's like a drug, I guess. You need more and more of it.
Carl, do you think that? I mean, do you really view this as sort of a show trial? You think there's no legitimate inquiry that could be made into the January 6th?
I think there should have been an inquiry made into it. The Republicans pulling out of it was not a good thing. Pelosi wouldn't let them have some of their flamethrowers on the committee, but she put Adam Schiff on it. I mean, it was from the beginning.
It's ridiculous.
Just a partisan exercise, and the House Speaker and the House Minority Leader have everything to do with that, and it's a shame. I think they've mismanaged it from the start. Having said that, things are coming out that are interesting, and some of it's reporting by the Washington Post and New York Times and various authors, and some of it's from the witnesses. But there's an interesting tension, you guys, and that's this. So did Donald Trump really cause this? The Washington Post had a piece recently, all of Trump's tweets, all of the things he said and did. And the thought occurred to me that if you believed Donald Trump, I'm talking about you're an American citizen, that this election was stolen, not only stolen, but willfully stolen, that Biden was part of it, that the Democrats did this, they intended to do it, and they did it. And as Trump said, there was statistically no possible way he could have lost the election. Now, I don't believe any of those things, but if the people who believed Donald Trump, and Trump was saying them, believe them, it seems to me they have a right, they have an obligation to storm the Capitol.
I don't know about that, but okay.
An obligation to storm the Capitol.
If you think that our democracy has already been usurped, if you believe that, you would do things that they might not all be statutory.
Hang the vice president.
Well, but what I'm getting to is this. As this goes on, this inquiry, and this is, I think, the Democrats' goal, Trump looks worse. But I think the people who responded to his call are less culpable. And to me, the Democrats want it both ways. They want to make these people into monsters who stormed the Capitol, but they want to blame Trump. And I think at some point you have to pick your storyline, because if Trump's to blame, those people are less to blame. He's the sitting commander in chief. He says over and over and over and over again that he has proof that the election was stolen from him, and you, the people, have been disenfranchised. Well, staging a riot at the Capitol seems like a logical response to that, if you believed it. So I think, a long answer, but I think unraveling this and getting to the point of what happened, I think it's very important. I just wish it hadn't been done as a partisan exercise.
Well, I'll just tack on to that. I mean, this is the problem. Nancy Pelosi, I think, ensured that it was always going to be politicized. There's no question, right? But she ensured its demise when she refused, for the first time ever this has ever been done, right? Refused to allow the minority their appointments on this committee, just rejected them. And once that was done, McCarthy pulled out, they took their ball and went home. And it was just, and then she appoints Adam Kinzinger and, Liz Cheney as the vice chairman of the committee. I mean, just, it's ridiculous. Now it is just a complete joke.
Well, she, in so doing too, she ensured Liz Cheney's defeat in her primary.
Oh, Carl, Liz Cheney was going to lose well before she was appointed to this committee.
Well, she's going to lose worse now.
You may be right about that. But for those reasons, and I looking back, I don't know why Nancy Pelosi, Jim Jordan and Banks, they're going to do their thing. That's part of what Congress, everybody has their grandstanders, Adam Schiff and the like. And it's like, what was she so afraid of that she wouldn't allow these guys on the committee? She'd be in a much better position if, from a bunch of different angles, if she had just let the Republicans appoint their committee members. And yes, they're going to do their grandstanding and their thing or whatever, but they would at least be able to say that, we have members and representatives from the Republican Party on this committee who are getting to have their say. And at the end of the day, guess what? They were overwhelmed by the evidence that we collected or whatever, the witnesses that we called, but that's all gone now. It's not going to happen.
Well, Tom, or conversely, if she was going to exercise veto power over Republicans she didn't like, Kevin McCarthy should have been allowed to do the same for the Democrats. I mean, if that was her position, then that suggests something else, that the two leaders agree and everybody agrees on all the members of the commission, which to me would have actually been even better than having these flamethrowers from each side.
How about they just follow the rules of Congress and they don't do unprecedented things?
Well, I'm saying out of 435 members, you couldn't find a dozen who aren't known as, demagogues. I think you probably could have. Small
and shrinking list, I think. But well, we're going to have to leave it there. So I want to thank Carl Cannon and Tom Bevan. We're usually here Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. So bookmark this podcast. Check back often. Email me at takeaway@realclearpolitics.com. Let me know if you've got a good idea for our next big bet. I think we need another one.
Double or nothing.
I encourage you to go to Real Clear Politics, read one article from a writer or publication with whom you disagree. Get your free subscription to Carl Cannon's Morning Note. That is one of a few free newsletters you can get at RealClearPolitics.com, including the Real Clear Politics Takeaway newsletter, which will keep you up to date on this podcast. Thanks for listening. Until next time, for Real Clear Politics, I'm Andrew Walworth.